Hello again, brothers and sisters. This is the Treetop Flyer coming back at you again for part 5 of our Living Permaculture series, continuing right from part 4 that we just showed you about knives and cutting tools and wilderness survival classes and wilderness survival tools into permaculture and self-sufficient homesteading. Now we're going to focus on going into the area of self-sufficient homesteading, self-reliant living, permaculture, butchering of animals, putting up your own meat, and the tools and the knives necessary for doing that. They all kind of flow right in one to the other, so that's why we're continuing on here. Again, I highly recommend that you acquire vintage high-carbon tool steel knives and cutting tools. What I've got here that I'm going to be showing is mostly vintage butchering cutlery and kitchen cutlery made long ago when it was really good quality high carbon tool steel, not stainless steel, and made here in America or made in Europe. If you know the right types and the brands to get and what to look for, you can find some very, very fine knife edge steel. Had to be, for commercial butchering is very hard on the tools, and they simply wouldn't buy tools that didn't hold their edge and last and be worth their investment. So I'm always looking for these and collecting them. They're everywhere. You can find them secondhand stores, garage sales, flea markets, swap meets, all over the place. Acquire them. They're excellent. Now, some of them will work very well to be converted into survival knives and bushcraft knives and knives that you'll use more aligned with the wilderness survival skills and preparedness kind of thing. But these are all the knives that we use to put up all our own meat, which we do, and butchering our own animals that we raise on the homestead and or do for other people, which I also do and teach other people how to do. So it all comes together very nicely. And it's sun's right on me now, as you can see, so it's that penetrating metal sun of Indian summer, and it's actually quite warm. So let's start. We'll go right in with the largest of them that you would use, which is traditional meat cleaver. You can see this is a very heavy, large, thick one for butchering large animals, of course, or chopping up the bones and cutting through the bones or separating the bones from larger animals like elk, maybe a large deer, cows, pigs, all that, and chopping the meat up in large chunks. So I have several of them here of different sizes that are nice. Now, the smaller ones, of course, are also very useful for vegetables. Chopping up your winter squash. We put up lots and lots of winter squash, and we live on the winter squash that we grow for all the way through to the next garden season. So, as you know, some of them are very hard shelled and very difficult to cut with a knife. So, but these meat cleavers, butchering meat cleavers, are very helpful for even some of the vegetable stuff. So have a few of different sizes. You know, when you get into if you're into like being a chef and Chinese prepared food, having those little meat cleavers can be very, very handy. All right, so then we get into the larger butchering, straight kind of chopping knives. These are also really wonderful for vegetables, larger vegetables, as I said, squash, corn. These have phenomenal steel in them. These particular ones are European, and they're very heavy. The way they're designed is excellent. Now, a lot of guys that are into the mountain man rendezvous and pioneer kind of reenactment stuff and the old mountain men reenactment rendezvous and things, they're really into collecting these knives and sometimes put, you know, exotic handles on them and elk antler handles and deer antler handles and things like that. And they like to carry those big knives at the rendezvous, and the mountain men did that. That's why the Indians, the Native Americans, called them the long knives often, because they carried these big knives, but they were butchering buffalo and elk and bear and very large animals, in which case a large knife is very helpful at times. You can use smaller knives as well, but We like these also for doing vegetables and using them in the kitchen. When you see these old vintage kitchen cutlery knives with this forged pattern on them, Forged Craft is one brand name, there's a number of them. They have superb high carbon tool steel, and they really hold their edge, and they're excellent and very durable and last forever. So I'm always collecting these good European butchering tools and American-made vintage ones, and they're excellent. Now, some of them actually will even have multi-purpose, because, for instance, this knife here, this is a butchering knife, a boning knife, a filleting knife of sort for boning out meat and cutting around bones and stuff. But these curved knives like this, these vintage butchering cutlery, are the best knife for making shavings to start your fire. You get a good piece of wood like cedar and maple and dry pines and stuff like that, and you cut your shavings, curl them right off. Excellent for your tinder bundle and getting your fire going in a traditional fire making sense. So some of them overlap and can be used, as I said, very nicely in wilderness survival skills or living, long-term living that way. Some larger, straight butchering and boning type knives, superb steel in these. Particularly the ones you see often, they have these sometimes yew wood handles, sometimes boxwood handles, and or maple handles and good brass grommets. Excellent quality. Now here's an excellent multi-purpose tool that was custom designed by a custom knife maker down in Oregon. I got this at, I believe, one of the gunner knife shows. This is an elk butchering tool designed for elk hunters who want one tool that's not too large that they can carry with them in the field, so they can dress and butcher an elk in a remote elk hunting camp and such. So the idea was it's heavy enough that it can be used like the meat cleaver for cutting apart the very large quarters and parts of an elk or separating the leg bones and such. But it has this hook. This is your gutting and skinning hook that you use for skinning the animal, gutting and taking out the guts and the parts that aren't the edible meat quarters. So it's a one all-purpose tool for large game, but equally good for cows and pigs and moose and anything that's large. Superb for the skinning. It's got this curve here to be designed to work around the body parts of an animal to effectively remove the hide, so you don't cut through it, because you want to save your hides and tan your hides and learn how to do traditional hide tanning and leather making, because you may not always be able to just go easily by it. So that's a wonderful art and skill that I've done a lot of, and I have many friends that are real masters at that, and it's kind of their trade. So that's that tool. This, of course, is a meat hook. When you get to handling large chunks of meat in home butchering or game that you've hunted, if you've ever done it or seen anyone do it, they're awkward, they're bulky, and they're very slippery. So having the hook that you can hook in them and pull them around and hang them and move them and position them to do your cutting and preparation of specific cuts of meat is very handy. I've done a lot of butchering of my own animals and animals for other people and taught people how to do it. So you learn all the tricks and you learn the things that make that an easier job. It's never an easy job. Here's a very interesting all-round survival tool. I'm showing this here. It could have easily fit in the earlier section when I showed the wilderness tool. This is an African, designed from an African tool. I believe they call it the Asenji or Bushman or something like that. Cold steel makes this. But what its design was is that you can put any length or size of handle you want on it. And this is the type of a simple Bushman's type knife that would be used in Africa and other third world countries, where they do everything with it. It's a machete, it's a butchering tool, and a spear. You can attach a long handle on it and use it as a spear for catching fish or other large animals. It may surprise you to learn that there are actually people in the world that still use a spear quite often in their life. Indigenous people who still live in their traditional ways. They're still, thank goodness, are some of them around. They're the true caretakers of the earth and understand how to live with the earth in a much more harmonious way than modern man. So that's an African, designed after a traditional African tool. Very handy. I've put handles on it and used it as a spear, and quite nice. So then we get into the ones that are slightly smaller and straight. And what they are is boning tools and filleting knives. Excellent steel in some of these. Again, you look for that forged pattern on there where the machine stamps them, and they're very excellent. Now here's a good one too. This is Swedish. This is Swedish laminated steel, which means it has in the center a harder tempered piece of high carbon tool steel, laminated and forged together with slightly softer steel on the sides and or the back. This makes a tool that can take a very, very sharp edge and holds its edge under use very well, but can be sharpened and easily and still take a lot of abuse. Swedish laminated steel is very good if you know what to look for. So I've collected those, and they do everything over there with them. You know, they carve and whittle with them and fillet the fish and butcher game and everything. So a very nice tool to have. So these are the straight boning knives. Now a lot of people like to have knives like this for survival skills knives too, because they're very practical and handy for certain bushcraft skills. They're not as thick. They will not take the abuse of the heavier survival knives, as I was showing earlier, like the K-bar and the pals and all those kind of things. But they're very effective for certain things, bushcraft. Again, I like that one for cutting shavings to make fire. Now these are fillet knives, and specifically for fish and or filleting around parts of the meat that are hard to separate from the bone or near the joints and around the head of the animals and such, and cutting organs out and cleaning them and things. So fish fillet knives, and this one is in particular, if you've never seen one of that's for fish. Now in the Pacific Northwest rainforest, temperate rainforest here, we are blessed with the salmon. The salmon traditionally was one of the main foods of the indigenous people who lived in this part of the world, and what a fabulous food source it is and was, though today we could begin to have some real problems with it, with the pollution of the oceans and the radioactive waste coming out of Fukushima. So sometimes it's questionable. But when living here in the rainforest on the coast over the last 20-some years, I certainly have eaten a lot of salmon and love the salmon. And this is a spoon for scooping out the eggs, the roe, that wonderful salmon eggs. And you can use it in butchering other animals as well, but it's a type of fillet knife and a spoon for scooping out the delicious eggs. Another kind of unique shaped kind of fillet knife for cutting around bones and parts of the animal body. More fillet knives. A very delicate, small, sharp fillet knife for small fish, for deboning, taking the bones out of fish and other small animals and game. Very helpful. And for taxidermy work and skinning and preparing hides and stuff. Sometimes you just need a very small, delicate, sharp knife to get in some of those areas. And these are high carbon, very good quality paring knives for, again, butchering smaller animals. I like to have quite a few of those. Excellent, excellent tools. Now here's a very unique knife that's specifically designed as a game skinning and butchering tool. It's called a Wyoming knife. It's the name brand of it. And its design is it's a two-bladed one. One, it has this hook with a very sharp razor in the middle of it. And again, that's for unzipping the gut and up the quarters of the animal for the skinning. The way you cut them down the center and up the legs to take the skin off the animal, skin it to get down to the meat. You can use, and then you can use this part here also for skinning, getting in delicate places, because you may want to be saving that hide. You may want to taxidermy that hide up or tan it yourself, make some wonderful buckskin clothing. Brain tan it, perhaps brain tan it if you don't know about that. Traditional tanning methods quite often use the brain of the animal, and brain tanning, traditional brain tanning, makes the softest, breathable, most wonderful, flexible type of deer, elk, and animal hide. Quite an art to do it, but that's how it was done. And then you smoke the hide and color it and condition it and make it even more durable. I've done a lot of that. And so this is a wonderful little tool, very effective, very lightweight. You can carry it on your belt, even if you're in the field. Makes the initial field dressing and or skinning and butchering of the animal quick and easy, and very lightweight tool. I like that. And of course, some real nice heavy-duty scissors are very helpful for cutting places on the hide and some of the internal organs and parts out. So I like to have a nice pair of heavy-duty scissors that can cut anything, you know. And in some places you may want to cut the bones apart. What's going on here? So I have a limbing saw. Oh, I've got it locked in the position that it won't open. But actually that's a pruning limbing saw for trimming branches and pruning trees and stuff. But this kind of teeth configuration is actually very helpful for cutting joints apart. Cutting the joints apart can be very challenging sometimes. That large animals have very strong tendons and connective tissue, and it's also very slippery and slimy and hard to cut with knives. And you may not want to just be chopping into it and breaking and splintering the bone. So sometimes sawing parts of the animal's large game apart is very, very helpful. And then there is those larger type saws, which I don't have here right now this moment, but I have them, that are used for sawing apart the bones and the carcasses of very large game like cows and pigs and elk and moose. If you live in a part of the world where you can get moose, Alaska, Canada, New England, Maine, Siberia, Russia. Moose is a very wonderful meat. Big animal, very challenging to deal with. So, all right, so we're going to rearrange this now, and I'm going to get into demonstrating some sharpening, because we always want to show you some skills associated with the living permaculture knowledge that we give you, and how to use these tools, how to maintain them, and how to sharpen them. Now, I've taught sharpening as a professional woodworker and cabinet maker, and teaching people how to sharpen woodworking tools and how to sharpen the tools associated with wilderness survival skills and now butchering skills. And if you can't get them sharp, you're going to have a very challenging, frustrating time of using them, and dangerous, because a dull tool, we always say a dull tool is a dangerous tool, because you start applying more pressure than is necessary and you can slip. And you also have to have the skills of how not to cut toward yourself and injure yourself. These kinds of knives can give you a devastating injury. I mean, very, very, very serious injuries. So having them very sharp actually is a preventative from that if you skillfully know how to use them as well. So that's what we're going to demonstrate a little bit on the sharpening. So let me rearrange this, and we'll show you that here. All right, now we're going to get into a sharpening demonstration. Again, cutting edge tools are no good unless they're very sharp. Now there's two parts of the overall sharpening process. One is grinding, and grinding is where you form the geometry of the edge of the tool and or shape the tool. That's a grinding process on the old-fashioned grindstone or a modern grindstone, however you do it. I'm not going to show that today because it's a little more lengthy, and we'll put that in a future homesteading skills episode of Living Permaculture. but I'm going to just tell you about it. The grinding process is done to pre-shape the edge and get as close as you can to a sharp edge without burning the tool or damaging it. In other words, when you grind with an abrasive tool on high carbon tool steel, heat, of course, is built up. Sparks will come out. And as you grind, you can even tell the hardness of the type of tool steel you have by the color of the spark pattern and the shape, and it throws its sparks. The heat will build up, and of course, if you don't keep the tool moving on the grindstone or press too hard or have a clogged stone, the heat will build up very, very quickly and burn the edge of the tool. You do not want to do that. That is drawing the carbon out to the outside edge. If you're burning the tool and it has black and blue dark spots on the edge, that tool will never hold its hardness on its fine cutting edge, no matter what you do in the honing process. So the second aspect of sharpening is honing. And honing is using a stone of various sorts or a very fine abrasive to bring it out to a very, very sharp and or polished edge, depending on the type of tool it is. I have cabinet makers' carving tools. I used to do a lot of fine wood carving. They have to be absolutely polished, razor sharp, to cut the grain of the wood in any direction, no matter how difficult the grain may be. Those tools have to literally be polished. But most of these knives and axes and hatchets and scythes and machetes don't have to be quite so polished and sharp, but as I showed you, they need to be sharp enough to cut paper easily. So two processes, grinding and honing. We're going to demonstrate the honing today. Now, in absence of a power grinder, whether it's an old-fashioned hand crank one or you have put a motor onto it or whatever, the grinding process is the dangerous one because that's where you can burn it. The second stage is honing, and that's where you bring it out to the very, very fine edge. If you don't have a grindstone, you can use a file, a regular mill file as it's called, and you can get the geometry and out close to an edge ready to hone with a file, but it takes longer and you have to be patient and you have to be skillful with it, but there's no danger in burning the tool. I have a very large old-fashioned sandstone large grindstone that you may have seen from the old days. Now the old-timers would not take their fine axes, their fine machetes, their good quality knives, and put them on a modern high-speed electric motor grinder. The higher the speed, the quicker the heat builds up, and the quicker you can destroy the fine edge of your tool by drawing the carbon to the outside edge. But it's a slower process. So if you've ever heard the saying, you got to keep your nose to the grindstone, meaning you have to stay very diligently applied in your work, it's because it's a very delicate process that takes quite a period of time so that you don't damage your tool. I'll show you how, or if you're in the field and you hit a rock or you hit something that damages the edge of your tool, you can't hone that away. It would take a very, very long time with a honing stone to do so. So you have to use a file to get rid of a nick or a gouge in the edge, and so there's where a file can be done. So I'm going to start demonstrating. Now, what I've got here is a cabinet maker's multi-stone, and basically what it is it's several honing stones of various roughness or smoothness that I've used for many, many years as a woodworking craftsman, and it's a large stone that works well for them. Now, I've got some lubricating fluid. What it is here, keeping in an environmentally progressive way, I've eliminated everywhere we can using petroleum type oils. Petroleum is indeed the source of all the chemical toxicity on this entire planet, of which we are suffering some very severe consequences. And the more research you do in that, the more I think you'll understand. We'll talk more about that in later episodes. So I try to eliminate any of the petroleum products I can. So they actually have now this safer, amazing formula of a paint thinner. It's a paint thinner, very thin fluid. Now, on your honing stones, you can use water if you start from the very beginning with water. The idea is you want to be able to flush the debris out of the surface of the stone and keep the stone clean. So I'm going to put a little bit of that on there, and now I'm just going to start demonstrating, taking some of my knives and things. The idea is place the tool down on there, hold the bevel at a consistent angle, and simply do it one direction and do it another direction on the stone in a consistent single movement. The idea is to put it down there and lock it in position right on the angle, and it takes practice and skill to learn to do that, and then move it. Don't try to get into figure eights and fancy round and round and round. You'll spend a lot of time. You won't be working right up on the fine edge that you need to. It's just a simple one direction and then another. Now, obviously I make this look really easy because I've done a whole lot of it, but it is easy once you get the hang of it, okay? That's all there is to it if you've ground the tool right out to a very fine burr edge. And what I mean is you'll feel a little jagged, rough little burr edge, and you're going to knock that off. The honing process is just knocking that burr edge off and polishing it so that you can cut that paper. And the process is the same for all these knives. So I'll just do a few of them here real quick and touch them up. If you do it properly, it's a very quick, easy job to get the knife right up to razor sharpness. Again, that's true only if you have ground it properly. Now, let's say here this is a little different process for a machete. I've got a big machete here. It's a little tricky to move the machete on the stone, but you can move the stone on the tool. So what I have here is various kinds of abrasive honing stones. I have big ones, I have little ones, and you move them against the tool. Now, if it's not a really good edge, you could grind it if you had a grinder, but you want to be very careful not to burn it, but you can also file it. So the way you file it, now, when you do any of these sharpening processes with a sharp tool, you must be very careful. It's very easy to slip and injure yourself. But you take the file, you support the tool, and you would go like so. And you work one side, and then you would turn it around and work the other side. See, I'm just taking the file right across that edge. Machetes are a wonderful tool to use if you know how to get them sharp. I can build a complete debris hut with a machete very quickly and efficiently. Okay, so I used the file. Now I'm going to use the honing stone and do the same thing. Can you see this well, what I'm doing here? Okay. Turn it around. Support it. Hold it at the right angle. Now, if you have a vise or something to hold the tool, that makes the process a little easier, but you can do it without it. And sometimes you need to do a little extra work right up here on the tip, both sides. And that's the honing. And then you feel it. You very carefully taking your finger away, going away from the edge, not toward the edge, and feel if you've knocked off that little burr edge. Wipe it off. Now, don't take your sweaty or dirty hands and run them along the fine cutting edge of any tool. Sweat is acidic. There's salt in it, you know. You'll be leaving a residue on the edge that will then start to rust and corrode the edge and put little micro fine nicks in it and dull the tool while it's just sitting there. And you don't want to do that. All right. So it's the same for all these tools. I'm just going to touch a few of them up here real quick. And then I'll show you how you do the same thing on an axe. Voila, that's all you need to do, and you're ready to do fine filleting of meat. Now these knives right here, these are really wonderful. This shape right here, it's almost very similar to the survival knife that I showed earlier, slightly different shape. These are very popular in the survival skills world because they make an excellent all-round survival knife. Again, they're a little thinner, but the steel is very good in them. These have a little flexibility in them, more like a machete. So they're very helpful in some things where you have to put pressure on them like that. But they hold their edge very nicely. People like to take these simple handles off and put much more exotic custom handles, you know, that are I'm not showing today, of course, fine traditional flint knapping or taking obsidian and turning it into a flint knapped knife with a traditional, very, very ancient method. Obsidian, by the way, will take the finest edge of any substance known on this planet. Finer than the best of metal. It'll go down to a few microns on its fine edge. They use it in very delicate surgeries because it makes the smoothest cuts and doesn't leave scar tissue. So the sharpest material you can find on this planet is natural volcanic glass obsidian. I thought you should know that. And what an art it is to work it. I've got friends that what they can do with that, it's remarkable. They're artists. They're absolute artists at it. Okay, same thing. Now, machete, the axe, same kind of deal. Support it. Take this handheld honing stone. Okay, so finishing up on an axe or a hatchet, it's the same kind of deal. Support it. And take the stone to the tool instead of trying to use the tool on the stone. That's all there is to it. Razor sharp, can cut paper. Imagine how it'll cut a piece of wood. Okay. Now, in our last permaculture video, we showed you how to use a hand scythe for cutting grass and hay and foliage and brush. And we highly recommend it. It's a wonderful, elegant tool that'll give you quite a physical workout and save you from having to use polluting, petroleum, gas guzzling, noisy, engine-driven equipment. So, but we didn't show you in that video how to sharpen it. So here's the scythe, traditional handheld scythe. It's a big one. I cut all this grass here before we did this. Excellent tool, that's how you use it. Anyway, you can take a file to it first if it's a bit rough or you have some nicks in it from rocks and such, but this one's in good shape, so all it needs is to be touched up with the handheld honing stone. Now, be very careful. If you slip and you hit your fingers on that, you're going to get quite a cut. So I'm very careful, and you just keep it going forward, and you keep your hand away, and you do this side. And you turn it over and do the other side, the top. Until you get a nice sharpened edge on there, and make sure you have no rust, because if you cut through wet grass, and the grass is all wet anyway inside, so it tends to get a little rust on there and can dull your tool. So you gotta just keep knocking that little burr off both sides until it's good and sharp. And that's how you do that. It's real simple. Now, if you hit a stone or something and you bend it, you have to lay it out on a flat piece of metal with a ball-peen machinist hammer and pound on it and straighten it back out. Or take it off its handle and work it to make sure it stays nice and flat, and then it'll perform very nicely. Okay. So, we showed the machete, we showed all this. Now, all those butchering, homesteading, butchering, and type knives and tools, I keep all in a box, one box, so I can have them all accessible, carry them, go anywhere, in the forest, in the field, on the farm, someone else's homestead, farm, whatever. Roadkill. I highly advocate roadkill. I know there are certain people and authorities who have issues with that, but I would rather feed hungry people and honor that animal and give it a second use than to let it sit on the side of the road and rot after a car hit it. I think that's a disgraceful thing to do with animals. So if they're still in good shape and can feed someone, why not? Okay, so sharpening, essential skill for craftsmanship, essential skill for survival, wilderness survival skills, essential skill for homesteading and self-sufficient living. So I've only touched upon it. I could take any of these things and go into a much greater depth and much longer class or much longer demonstration. But for now, this is an overview for a TCTV program. So we're kind of condensing it to keep it a little bit short. So I'm going to reconfigure my table now here and talk just briefly about the backpacks and preparedness, okay? Okay, to finish up here for this episode of Permaculture, I do want to just briefly mention a little bit about the backpacks and preparedness and the consciousness of preparedness. As we showed you all these knives, as I said, I keep many different sizes and configurations of backpacks prepared all the time for various things. From a small little day pack like so, that actually can hold quite a bit, that I take with me everywhere I go, and it's in our automobile when we drive somewhere. If I'm hitchhiking or taking public transportation even, I carry this. To a little more intermediate size one that would be a full day or overnight, 48-hour, maybe stretching to a 72-hour survival backpack that you can fit quite a bit of stuff in there. There's quite a bit of stuff in this. And go all the way to the big kahuna here where you have an actual military style pack that you can take apart, and it has individual sections that you can carry it all together and get all your gear to one location, and then maybe take some of it off and cache it and leave it, or set up a base camp and do various things from one position. So you have adaptability and maneuverability and different different intentions or how you'd use them. I have some even larger than this that are, you know, your forever, go to the forest and survive forever kind of pack if you had to do that. Now, a little bit about that. Please take a look anywhere in the world right now, and you can see some very, very good reasons to be preparedness minded. If you go to the eastern seaboard, the coast of America right now, you have major hurricanes dumping 1,000-year record floods, catastrophic floods, okay? If those kinds of events happen in your area, are you prepared? Are you prepared for, here in the Pacific Northwest, for a major earthquake or a volcanic eruption or some major civil disruptions? Look at the entire Middle East. Look at the entire Mediterranean basin. Very, very large numbers of people in refugee situations and having to move to flee for their lives. Permaculture and preparedness and survival skills all blend together. They dovetail together like all the fingers of one hand. And I've lived them all, I teach them all, and try to help others do the same. And we actually live in times where it's very wise to do that. And so that's kind of what the backpack thing and being prepared. Those knives I showed you are always in here. Many of those tools are in here. All of these backpacks will always have water, some food, some methods of starting fire, some survival tools and tools useful for various situations. They will always have water purification. methods, extra clothing and changes of minor clothing, not enough to completely, always some sort of shelter clothing to keep the rain and wind and snow off you. All that and more can always go in even a small pack. 72-hour survival preparedness pack, and certainly much more than that in these large ones. So research, think about these things, and be prepared, you and your family and your loved ones. And I think we'll kind of close with that for this time. Thank you so much, and look for this on TCTV, and we'll see you in the future for parts 6 and 7. All right. In closing, I'm the Treetop Flyer. We are the Altai Band. Have a lovely fall, Indian summer, and a safe and comfortable winter, and be prepared always.